ladies and gentlemen. This is Scott McDonald, and we are somewhere in the middle of June. And being in the early part of the first third of the month of June, all right, there. And today we're going to be talking about two topics that may make a little bit of anger, but I am going to talk about specific locations, and I'm going to talk about some trends that are going on that are affecting what is happening in the places where you might want to practice. Now, this may sound crazy, okay, but politics matters. Politics matters in that there are lots of places where the people have such a strong political bent that it's making it difficult for people of a different political bent to feel comfortable in going there. One of the obvious examples is New York City. We actually have had this week some significant movement of people leaving the state, but particularly the New York City. Now, the whole of New York is not like that. It's kind of funny. It's almost like two states. And it's been the policies of the state government but particularly New York City, that are making people kind of nervous about sticking around. So they're leaving. The same thing is true in various other parts of the United States, including Washington, D.C., and a great deal of the state of California. With that in mind, I just want to talk about the relationship of politics, and particularly progressive politics, and also the birth rate, on how that's affecting how people are thinking about where they're practicing and where they're going in places that are showing particular promise. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, as I so often do. Here we go. I'm calling this progressive politics and demographics. I was going to put something a little bit more, controversial for the name of this episode, but I thought, I'm not going to cheese off more people than I already have. But it really goes down to this. Demographers are looking at the relationship of progressive politics and how that's affecting where people move and where they go and where they come from. So it's going to be a discussion that will have a political connotation. Now, as you know, Dr. Demographics is all about knowing where to move, start a business or practice, promote your efforts, and get the most out of your location. Our job is to help you know the where issues. Now, obviously, we're in healthcare, and that's not a particularly political thing, but in some ways it's becoming more so. Now, progressive politics and demographics are having an influence any place that they're found. But please don't assume I'm talking about large swaths of the country, because there are some parts of the country, and I'll use Denver as an example, where the rest of Colorado is simply saying, no, we are not going to play progressive politics. But Denver is. And so even within a fairly short geographic area outside of Denver, it's a different political mandate, and the demographics are shifting. Now, a couple of facts came out in my research that I wanted to share with you. Progressives, self-identified progressives, make up 8% of America. 8%. And you may say, well, I sure hear a lot more about progressives than just 8%. Well, that's because media and academics identify with them, and their influence appears larger than it would otherwise be. So when you have the effect, literally it's called in market research, the social media effect. It's also called a media effect study, in which the people who are reporting on a story, if they live there, it's a much bigger story. If they don't live there, it's not such a big deal. It's kind of swept under the carpet. And that has had the effect of making people assume, oh my gosh, there's a flood of progressivism. And we'll talk about that for an example. Now, these progressives are primarily located in three media centers, which is New York City, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C. And it doesn't mean that that's the only place that progressives live, and it certainly doesn't mean that they don't have an influence elsewhere. But it does mean that the media centers are the ones who are acting with a megaphone, and you can assume lots of things to be true that really are not. Now, about 80% of the American population today, this week in a Gallup poll, said they are against political correctness. They say it's a problem. Now, you may say that's kind of interesting, because everything you've heard has suggested that on Facebook, for example, and Twitter, If you state an opinion that goes against what the orthodoxy is, the politically correct thing, you'll get canceled. Well, that's okay with them. They feel fine about it. But what's happening is Twitter is attracting competitors. And the same thing with Facebook, and the same thing with, well, I won't go on. But those sturdy voices that we've heard for so long look like they're not doing so well. That's true of CNN, for example, and MSNBC, whose ratings are so low right now that they're charging only for the people who are going through the airport where these shows play. They're not able to compete with the other major networks on regular broadcast stations. Now, almost everybody, and I should say quota, not quotes, racial quotas in hiring and college admissions are vastly unpopular, but you wouldn't know that if you were just listening to the media. Now, here's something that I found interesting. If you start looking about the Gallup polls, and there are Gallup polls which go for only a limited sector of the United States apart, or a given media opinion. There are several, if you look at the national polls, national numbers, they're saying, hey, anti-Semitism is not cool. Critical race theory is a dying thing. It's extremely unpopular. The idea that you're going to say that white people are responsible for all terrible things that have happened to black people or to people of color. Well, most people say, no, that's not what I want to have taught in the schools. The defund the police. That is one of those policies that you hear a lot about, which has the kiss of death. And by the way, here's a manifestation of this. You remember the Academy Awards? The Academy Awards used to be a big deal. Well, all of a sudden, they've done some research on the Academy Awards, and right now it is in the tank. Nobody wants to watch the Academy Awards. And year by year, as it comes up, people are saying, I'm out of here. Forget it. Now, that's different from other award shows, even the Tonys, where people with talent are displaying those skills on live. But if you look at the Academy Awards, the Golden Globes and others, where the elites kind of manifesting things, it ain't going so well for them. Also, illegal immigration is not popular. I hate to tell you, when it is not popular, it just means that we may hear a lot about it in the news and assume that because the administration in Washington, D.C. is in favor of it, that it's true everywhere. But it is a rallying cry against what a lot of voters want. The same thing is true of the anti-carbon policies. Now, there's been a lot of stuff and I'll bring up a little bit more about fracking. You would assume that everybody is against fracking and everybody's against fossil fuels, coal and oil and natural gas, but not so much. Additionally, no cash bail has been a big deal in larger cities. Most people are in favor of cash bail, meaning if you get arrested, you have to make bail to get out. In some parts of the United States, you don't. School children wearing face masks is a loser. And the homeless encampments that are found throughout many of the large cities in the United States are a loser. Public opinion is against them. Now, you may assume because you continue to see them in some places, and during a recent trip to California, we sure found out how much that's really going on. It's a serious thing. But how people feel about it is pretty interesting. Now, that's having an effect upon where people are willing to live and to work and where to move. So when I mentioned at the beginning that New York City is losing population, I had no idea the speed in which people are getting out of town. That's the big story, not just their numbers, but how fast. Now, the result is that less than 3% of the middle class see climate change as a major crisis. Now, I was a little surprised by this. Again, these are Gallup numbers. It doesn't mean that only 3% think climate change is a crisis. It just means that within the middle class, people are kind of going, I don't think it's that big a deal. And if it affects us in 200 or 300 years and it only affects us by maybe 1 or 2 degrees Celsius, most people are kind of saying it is not that big a deal. So much money that is being spent upon this is having an effect upon where people want to live and work. More than 14 million jobs are now at risk because of the fracking ban. Now, to put that in context, during the Great Recession back in, well, it was probably about 7 years ago, 8 million jobs were lost in the Great Recession, and all heck broke loose. Everybody was screaming. But they're saying 14 million jobs, which is close to double that, may be lost because of the changes in the energy market. What happens if that actually occurs? Now, the major recession is at risk due to the federal budget crisis. The federal government, the Joe Biden administration, has said we need to put $6 trillion into infrastructure. It's not particularly going to be evenly spread. They're pretty vague about what a shovel-ready job is. And therefore, everybody's kind of going, what is an infrastructure expense? Well, it's everything. Schools, that's infrastructure. And roads, of course, and bridges, that's absolute. But education taxes, having forgiveness for student loans, that's definitely a crisis. And it's a thing that we have to be careful of. But now look, what I'm telling you is this is having an effect upon where people live and where they work, and it's affecting where practices are likely to be successful. There is right now a significant population dislocation. And what it means is everybody has been talking about how the housing prices have gone up. It's because in some parts of the United States, people are moving and they're wanting to go someplace they feel they can afford. I have mentioned already some places, and they're primarily in the heartland. That was what last week's discussion was on. But I got a couple of calls from very, very smart doctors who said, hey, I don't want to live in Kansas. I don't want to go someplace in the Great Plains. I want to stay where there's more population density. And I get that. But the reason I brought those up is because those were the locations in the heartland where housing is more affordable, and therefore they're attracting more people. This is especially true in light of the fact that we have more people who have a little less cash to spend. Credit is becoming tighter. Inflation looks like it's going to rear its ugly head. And that's why the heartland was recommended. But I don't want to give you the impression that's the only places to go. Now, the entertainment industry is right now looking pretty bad. They're assuming after COVID that everybody was going to be flocking back to the movies. It didn't really happen. In fact, a lot of people are still being nervous about going to places where other people are gathering in large numbers. And so the entertainment industry is suffering. Disney World in Florida opened up and has done very well. Disneyland in California is still not doing well, nor are many of the tourism places on the West Coast. Now, there's also a problem that I'm going to be honest with you. The energy market is, there's a rebellion going on, but it's not national. In short, you can get energy prices like gas, oil prices, whatever, not too difficult. You can get them. The prices are a little bit high, but they're really skyrocketing in some of those progressive states. And the progressives have said, we don't want the energy markets to succeed. And that's where that North Face campaign came out. Now, I'm not going to get into that here, except to say it's having an effect. Now, there is another little phenomenon that I want to get into. I bring it up because it kind of transcends this progressive mantra, so to speak, and that is about the birth rate. Now, there is and has been since the 1970s the idea that the earth is too populated, there are too many people, and we need to reduce the number of births. That's one reason why people thought abortion was such a great thing. But we're finding out that's not so true. And a lot of people are saying we don't have enough children being born. And this is not just in the United States, but outside the United States, and it's having an effect here. The issue is not how many people there are, like the Malthusian crisis. You ought to look that up if you have time. But it's not just a matter of do we have enough food to feed the people that exist? It's the fact that we have so many people who are getting older that there is not a younger generation who is working and earning and putting that money back in the system. It's an issue of aging. Now, parts of the U.S. are growing old exponentially. I don't want to pick on the state of Maine or Vermont or New Hampshire, but they're old and they're getting older and they're getting older fast. And it's causing a problem within the housing market. Nobody's there to buy the houses that they once had. Other places where the birth rate is significantly higher, I'll name Utah, Idaho, Texas, where the birth rates are doing pretty well, and the numbers of children are not declining. They're actually moderately increasing. So if you happen to be in a pediatric practice of some kind, a pediatrician, pediatric dentist, orthodontist, you kind of have to keep track of where the birth rate is growing and where it's not. Now, some parts of the United States are expecting a baby boom. And I mentioned Idaho and Utah because it's obvious, but so is Texas. Surprisingly, Louisiana and Florida are actually looking like they're having more babies being born. Kind of a lot. So Arizona and Nevada are actually doing reasonably well as far as the baby booms. But this is only countering what is going on in other states. And therefore, this boom is not ubiquitous. Immigrants are not distributing themselves evenly in the United States. So they have opened the borders significantly, and they're saying, come on in, we could love you, you know. But the thing is, once immigrants cross the border, they don't stay in those ports of entry. So they may come into California where it's easier, or even parts of Texas, but they're not staying put. They're moving to other places. Part of that is due to work, but part of it is due to the fact that they want to have kids. And it's very expensive to have children in some places and not in others. Immigrants will consider birth freedom on a par with economic freedom. So if they make it expensive or difficult to have a new baby, those immigrants will want to move. Now, does that just include people from Mexico? No. We're having a lot of people from Central America, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Panama. But there's also people who are coming from South America. But the other little thing about this birth freedom are Asians. Right now, there is tremendous pressure on Asian countries for people to come to the United States and to take their ladies who are going to give birth and send them with their money so that they can establish citizenship in the United States. And Asia is huge for this. And don't assume that we're only talking about China. We've got Southeast Asia, including Vietnam, Cambodia. We've got Taiwan. Lots of nations in Southeast Asia. Oh, I should also mention India are having a lot of people who want to come to the United States for this birth freedom, as well as, of course, the economic freedom. Yes, they will continue to send their money back home. But the very fact that they can come here and earn it is making a lot of places very popular. Now, I just want to go into another little issue. You heard this week, I'm assuming, that China has killed its one-child policy for the longest time. 30, 40 years. There was a law that says you can only have one child per couple. And they would forcibly take women to be sterilized and abort their infants. And then they said, oh, well, now we have the two-child policy, and that's just right. Well, this week, guess what? They started the new three-child policy in China. Now, the reason it's sort of funny is because you cannot tell a woman to have a baby if she doesn't want one. You cannot stop women who want to have children from having them. It's like a force of nature, and it's not a small force of nature. But in China, they've opened up this three-child policy, and demographers have recently met in conferences, and they've said it's not going to work. The problem that they've had in China has been age. Remember, people are growing old, and they're not having children to replace them, and there is no social security system in most of these Asian countries, including China, and therefore having a child, particularly a boy, is the way to have your family to survive. The issue is it has created an odd situation where there is 20 to 30% more boys in most Asian countries than there are girls. And that, remember, it's the number of wombs that will determine the number of children, not just the fact that there are females. It is not a progressive issue. In short, this idea of having children is not a thing that progressives like. And therefore, those households that want to have children are moving to places where the progressive policies are not necessarily in vogue. Now, the aging population will be the new crisis, but it's not even, and it is not ubiquitous throughout the United States, and it is not ubiquitous throughout the world. It's an issue that demographers are tracking, and foreign countries are affecting the United States and its birthing patterns. The industrialized world is going through this issue, including parts of Europe. You know, you've probably heard this thing that, oh, yeah, they're paying women to have babies in Europe. Yeah, they are, but it's not working because, like I said, you can't make women have children who don't want it. And it is affecting the United States. The attitude is these nations throughout the world are saying we don't want to be there. So where in the United States are we seeing the most growth, new births, stuff like that? Columbus, Ohio is doing great. I'm going to list several cities right now that I want you to kind of think about. Des Moines, Iowa, surprisingly, has done much better. There's room. There's not nervousness. People say, I want to grow. I want to go there. Boise, Idaho has been growing faster the last 2 years than any other city in the United States. Remarkable. I was in Boise not too long ago to check it out. By the way, it's not just Boise. It's well, I won't go through all the cities in the surrounding area, but there are many of them that are showing significant growth within the region. And again, we're talking about Western Idaho. Utah County, Utah is growing crazy fast. And not only from people coming in from outside of the state of Utah, but natural births in Utah is picking up. Colorado Springs is doing great. Not Denver, but nearby Colorado Springs. Northwest Arkansas is showing significant natural births, and a large number of people are making that their destination. Fortunately, Northwest Arkansas has a great job market. North Carolina overall, throughout almost all the state, and I'll say not so much the extreme western part of the state, but North Carolina is doing remarkably well. Austin and San Antonio have surprised everybody. Now, here's the why. That whole progressive thing was very big in Austin. And everybody was talking about how, we need to have a raised minimum wage and all that. But Austin has passed a law recently in which camping outdoor in urban settings, the homeless, you're not allowed to do it. San Antonio has surprised everybody by pulling ahead in the amount of growth it has. Now, of course, we all know Dallas has been doing well and Fort Worth, but I'm saying overall, it's the attitude of Texas which has kept this growing as a central place. Eastern Oklahoma. Now, this may shock you a little bit, but Enid and some of these other places, OKC, are looking much better than they had previously. The cost of housing has gotten better, number of jobs, and if you want to telecommute, Oklahoma. North and South Dakota has shocked everyone because, hey, in case you haven't noticed, North and South Dakota is cold, and it's kind of a miserable place for a lot of people. They just don't like it. But I will tell you the number of people who moved to North and South Dakota is exceptional right now. Nebraska is, again, a big success story, and a lot of people are moving. Kansas, ditto. And here's the last shocker, Louisiana. Now, for a long time, Louisiana was not doing well. You remember Katrina. A lot of people left the state. But after a lot of those people left the state, the demographic character and the political character of Louisiana sort of changed. And some of those places, like in Baton Rouge, are looking much better than they once did. Now, New Orleans, granted, it's growing, but those other communities in Louisiana are looking good. Now, there is a book that I'm going to strongly recommend all of you who are in the pediatric type practice should read. And it is What to Expect When No One is Expecting. It's by Jonathan V. Last. It's currently in print. And it is a great statistical study on what's happening with families and growth in the United States and the impact that it's going to have on those parts of the country that welcome new births and those that don't. This is my telephone number, 833-424-6222. And you can, of course, visit us at drdemographics.com. The most popular things we do are to help you figure out where to put a practice or to evaluate the practice sites that you're already looking at. We can do both. We can also tell you how to promote a practice that may be kind of slowing down if it's not right on target. Please visit us at info@drdemographics.com. And I want to thank all of you for watching. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.